Hello and welcome to another Brawl video. Today we're checking out this black-green insect deck featuring Grist the Hunger Tide as our commander. This 3-mana planeswalker also counts as a 1/1 insect creature when it isn't on the battlefield, which means that Grist cannot be negated, since negate only counters non-creature spells, and while it's on the stack, Grist is a 1/1 creature as well. And in other formats this can have other advantages, like if Grist ends up in the graveyard it counts as both a creature and a planeswalker for delirium purposes, but in Brawl it's mostly going to matter while it's on the stack. And then once in play we get this 3 loyalty planeswalker, which can use his +1 ability, where we get to make a 1/1 black and green insect token, mill the top card, and if we happen to mill an insect, we get to add an extra loyalty to Grist and repeat this process. And about 1/4 of this deck are insect cards, so we've got a pretty decent chance of repeating the process, and maybe if we get lucky, we get to repeat it multiple times. Then the -2 makes us sacrifice a creature to destroy target creature, so that gives us some built-in removal, so we don't need to run a lot of removal in the main deck. And then the -5 is often our win condition, where we get to make each opponent lose life equal to the number of creature cards in our graveyard, so that can be a nice finisher, especially once we look at the deck breakdown. We've got a lot of self-mill effects to help fill the graveyard, to set up other graveyard synergies, but also to fuel Grist's -5. And then we've got a small mana acceleration section to maybe cast Grist on turn 2 and speed up the process of casting our more expensive spells. And then by far the largest section of this deck are the insects, which often have some additional graveyard synergies, and then these also include a few changelings, which can also count as insects when we mill them with Grist's ability. Then we've got a small section of reanimation effects, ways to bring back creatures out of our graveyard if we happen to mill them, so we can get them back on the cheap. And then we've got a miscellaneous section, which has a few more graveyard synergies. Some of the undergrowth cards may not be insects as a creature type, but they still work very well in this deck, as they'll get better the more creatures we have in the graveyard. So that's our deck in a nutshell. Now for the deep dive, starting with our mana acceleration, we've got Chromox, and then your typical 1-mana accelerant, Birds of Paradise, Delighted Halfling, Elvish Mystic, and Lanor Elves. Then I'm also running a Deathrite Shaman, since we're going to be filling the graveyard, so we're not going to struggle to exile a land to make additional mana, but this also gives us a bit of graveyard hate, as we can exile opposing instants and sorceries, or even creatures, if we pay the appropriate mana. Then we get to our self-mill effects, and these are usually 2-mana cards that will mill 3 or 4 cards on average. At 1 mana we do also have the Stitcher Supplier, milling 3 when it enters or dies, so that's a pretty good rate. Also a good creature to sacrifice to Grist's -2 ability, as it will mill even more cards. Then there's the Ripples of Undeath, which will mill 3 each turn, so this is one of our more powerful mill engines. And then we can also pay 1 mana and 3 life to return one of the milled cards back to our hand, so it can also provide some card advantage. Then there's the Aftermath Analyst, milling 3 when it enters, can also sacrifice it for 4 mana to return all lands from our graveyard back to the battlefield, so that can also be worthwhile once we've milled enough lands. Cash Grab will mill 4, can return any permanent milled this way. Commune can only find creatures and enchantments among the top 5, but also puts a lot of cards in our graveyard. There's Dredger's Insight, milling the top 4, returning creatures, artifacts, or lands, and then it stays in play, potentially gaining us some extra life. Then we've got Esper Origins, letting us surveil 2 and then gain 2 life. This is also a way to set up the top of our deck, so we can reveal an insect to Grist's +1 ability, so we get to repeat that process, so that can be pretty fun. And since this card has flashback, we also don't mind randomly milling it, so we can still cast it for 4 mana out of the graveyard, getting to surveil 2 and gain 2, but also make a 4/4 creature in the process. Then there's Gather the Pack with Spell Mastery, which we can also enable just by milling more cards, and then we get to look at the top 5, revealing up to 2 creatures with Spell Mastery to put in hand, and the rest still ends up in the graveyard, so it still essentially mills us. Then there's Malevolent Rumble, looking at the top 4 to find a permanent, and we also get to make an Eldrazi Spawn token, which can be sacrificed to help us ramp. Satyr Wayfinder and Town Greeter are both pretty similar, milling the top 4 to find a land. Then we've got a Grizzly Salvage, essentially milling the top 5, and then we get to keep a land or creature from among them. There's the Brute Tender, milling 3 when it enters, can also sacrifice it to maybe reanimate something we've already milled, so this can also go in the reanimation category. Then Witherbloom command has a lot of different modes, but we're usually going for the mill 3, return a land, and then we can choose one of the remaining modes. 6 when it attacks lets us mill 3, but also gives our non-land permanents in our graveyard a retrace, so we can discard a land from our hand in addition to paying their cost to cast them out of the graveyard, so that also gives us more ways to recur cards that we've already milled. Hedge Shredder, whenever we mill a land while it's in play, we'll put that land right onto the battlefield, so that can also help us ramp, and then if we crew this 5/5 vehicle, it attacks and then mills 2 as well, so that can also fill the graveyard some more. There's a Black Overlord, can either impend or cast it, milling 4 and returning a non-avatar creature from our graveyard to our hand, so that can also get back creatures we've milled previously. And then last but not least, there's Lumra, milling 4 when it enters, and then returning all lands from our graveyard back into play, and it also grows with the number of lands we control with Vigilance and Reach, so another awesome payoff. So a few of these self-mill effects like Lumra, Hedge Shredder, and the Analyst can also double up as ramp cards, so we have that additional utility. Then we get to the actual insects in the deck, starting with just a 1/1 Death Touch, don't really care about Toxic, just a way to protect our Planeswalker. There's Haywire Might to help us blow up artifacts and enchantments that aren't creatures. There's the Pollinator as well as Molt Tender, which can help us ramp in a roundabout way. Molt Tender can also just tap to mill a card, which can help fill the graveyard. We've got the newer Grist Voracious Larva, which can transform into a different Grist Planeswalker if we returned a creature from our graveyard to the battlefield, which we can accomplish in a multitude of ways. And then we can also start destroying artifacts and enchantments with a transformed Planeswalker, or make additional insect tokens. Then we've got Brain Maggot, which has been power crept by Deep Cavern Bat in the meantime, but it does count as an insect. Virus Beetle makes the opponent discard when it enters. We've got Masked Vandal as one of our many changelings, so these also count as insects, and this can also maybe help blow up an artifact or enchantment, and it's not too difficult to enable it since we'll have plenty of creatures to exile from our graveyard. The Springheart Nantuko as well as Skewed Swarm help us go wide, generating additional insect tokens in the process, so these also have pretty good synergy. Despite not going all in on the landfall cards, we still want to run some insects, and these happen to be insects that are also quite good by themselves. We've got the Cave Crawler as a 1/3 Death Touch that can maybe draw extra cards when it attacks. Realm Walker helps us look at the top card of our library, so that can also inform our decisions with Grist milling cards, and we can also play insects off the top of the deck, so it can also provide extra card advantage. Circuit Mender will gain life when it enters and draw a card when it leaves. And there's the Bloodline Pretender, which will pick up additional +1 counters when insects enter, so that also applies to our insect tokens. Then moving up the curve, we've got Carrion Grub milling 4 when it enters, and then gets additional power equal to the greatest power among creatures in our graveyard, so that can also add up. There's the Infestation, which will drain the opponent whenever our insects attack, and whenever we sacrifice a non-token creature, we get to make a 1/1 insect token with flying, so those are also pretty good. We've got Graveshifter as another changeling that can return a creature from our graveyard to our hand. There's the Explorer, which is one of the more exciting cards, letting us replay lands out of the graveyard, play an additional land each turn, and with Landfall we get to mill a card, so that's perfect for setting up our graveyard, especially combined with our fetch lands. Then there's the Millipede, milling 3 when it enters, picking up additional +1 counters equal to the number of creatures in our graveyard, so that can also get quite large. The Avenger, especially if we can ninjutsu it, can help us return a permanent from our graveyard back to our hand, so we can get back our more valuable creatures. There's the Gravestalker, which gets a discount equal to the number of artifacts and creatures in our graveyard, so we can routinely cast it for just a single black as a 5/4. And similar is the Huskburster Swarm, which also tracks creatures in exile as a 6/6 with Menace and Death Touch. Then Achik, the Emerald Radian, makes a 1/1 insect token for each artifact and creature in our graveyard, and whenever those insects die, we also get to drain the opponent and put a +1 counter on it. We've got Altanak, which we can maybe discard for 2 mana to help us ramp by returning a land from our graveyard into play, but we can also cast the 9/9 Trampler. Hornet Queen, a 2/2 Flying Death Touch, making 4 insect tokens with Flying and Death Touch, can also be very good in certain matchups. And then we've got the Distended Mindbender, which we can maybe emerge by sacking a creature, and then we can also make the opponent discard a bunch of cards from their hand. And then we've got our reanimation section, including the classic Reanimate for 1 mana, have to pay life equal to the reanimated creature's mana value. And then the more recent addition, Life/Death, can use Death as essentially a 2 mana reanimate, and then we cannot use it on the opponent's creatures, but that's not a huge drawback. Then Forever Young is a very interesting one in this deck. If we've already milled a whole bunch of insects, we can use Forever Young to get those back on the top of our library, and then we can use Grist's Plus ability to mill all of those insects one after the other, making a whole bunch of extra insect tokens, so that can also be a lot of fun. And then there's the 2-mana Persist to reanimate a non-legendary creature, put a -1 counter on it. And then we've already discussed the Brute Tender. And then our miscellaneous section includes White of the Reliquary, which can maybe sacrifice some of our insect tokens to help us ramp by searching up an extra land. Black Market Connections can make Shapeshifter tokens, which also count as insect, can also help us ramp with the treasures and draw extra cards. Doubling Season works quite well with all our cards generating insect tokens, and it also applies to our commander, which now also enters with double the amount of loyalty if we cast it afterwards, so we can potentially immediately use the -5 ultimate to drain the opponent. And then a Spider spawning, another card with flashback, so if we randomly mill it, we can still cast it out of the graveyard, generating a 1/2 Spider with reach for each creature card in our graveyard, so that can be another solid win condition. And then Izoni, despite not being an insect itself, will generate a 1/1 insect token for each creature in our graveyard, and can also sacrifice other creatures to gain a life and draw a card. And last but not least, there's the Lotleth the Giant, which is essentially our commander's ultimate ability stapled onto a 6/5 creature, so that can also help close out the game. And then our mana base has a few important utility lanes. Phyrexian Tower can maybe sacrifice an insect token to generate an extra mana for us, so that can help us ramp. We've got the channel lanes, with the Abandoned Mire especially being good here, as we can also mill additional cards and return something from our graveyard. Boseiju to deal with artifacts and enchantments. Shifting Woodlands can also pretty easily enable Delirium with all the self-mill effects, and then now this can turn into something that's already in our graveyard, so that can be good with some of our more expensive creatures, even though it's not going to trigger any Enter the Battlefield abilities. And then scrolling down here, we've got Cavern of Souls. If we name Insect, we can make our insects uncounterable, which also applies, of course, to our commander, which is an insect while it's on the stack, so that can be great against control. And then a Fountain Port can generate additional tokens, but we can also sacrifice tokens to draw. And then I also need to mention Swarmyard, a recent addition that can tap to regenerate target insect, a rat, spider, or squirrel, so that can also come in handy against some destruction effects. And then 3-Tree City, also quite good in a deck that can go wide with lots of insect tokens, as that can net us additional mana. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the play, facing the Chaos Crafter Mardu artifact. We've got 2 powerful reanimation effects, although no way to initially fill the graveyard unless we count getting a Surveil land. So this hand's a little awkward. Would love some mana acceleration to play Grist, but that's not going to happen. So I guess I can still try. And then just Surveil, hope to find some good 2-drop. Or any way to fill the graveyard, really. So we can set up our reanimation spells. Otherwise it's going to be a little slow to get started. And the Explorer's perfect to reanimate here, or Persist. I guess Persist is fine, would leave it at 3 toughness, but then I can always reanimate it later. But I guess the upside of Reanimate is that I can play the fetch land multiple times, which will then fill the graveyard even more. So I think this is worth it. So we'll fetch. I'll just get a basic in case I mill something juicy I want to persist. But I don't think that's going to be the case. Ooh, never mind, Hornet Queen. Alright, how about turn 2, Explorer into Hornet Queen. That's a pretty good start. And next turn, 3-Tree City with all these insects can also make a ton of mana. So, yeah, it doesn't get much better. And our opponent could have some removal or a board wipe, but we still got to have our fun. They milled a Connoisseur, which could have sniped something from our hand. It's gonna be the Moxie to discard and draw. Discarding a Liliana. Okay, let's play the city and name insects. So that can make 6 mana, 7, 8. So I can go Grist plus Carrion Grub, although I guess Cute Swarm is also quite good here. Let's see, if I place Cute Swarm, I can still play 1 extra land, so yeah, I guess we just tap the city now. Play the Swarm. Play my fetch land, make more swarms. And then I can still play Grist afterwards. Going for Carrion Grub, also reasonable. Milled an insect. Okay, so let's go to attackers. What turn is this? Turn 3, I believe. Yeah, I guess a Cute Swarm hasn't even made additional copies of itself since we don't have enough lands in play. So maybe going for Carrion Grub first was better, but now of course we do have more insects for the city. So we've got pretty much all the mana we would ever need, which we can translate into Izoni, drawing all the cards we would ever need. So I feel a bit bad for my opponent now. Grist can also set up the ultimate, although currently don't have a ton of creatures in graveyard since we keep milling lands. And still want to go for the fetch lands for Cute Swarm, but we could run out of black mana. So probably want to make black with the city. So make black. Can cast Carrion Grub into Izoni. Keep milling. This is called overextending, by the way. And Grist would deal 9. Can start sacking some insects. Maybe the original Cute Swarm. So I have an extra creature in graveyard for Grist. Can still Brain Maggot to check if they have any sweepers in hand. And draw with Izoni again. Probably just a random insect token. And then we can Brain Maggot, ultimate Grist attack. Opponent had Procession to double their tokens. Elspeth, yeah, nothing too scary. Grab Elspeth, I guess. And go to attackers. Send in the team. I've got a pretty nice collection of insect tokens, I'll admit. All the different arts. Opponent's at 7, and this should do it. Is this a turn 4 kill, I believe? It's hard to keep track of. And there we go, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Felothar, so a high toughness deck. Our hand's a little underwhelming, missing some mana sources. This is a little bit better. Can start by just playing tapped Overgrown Tomb. Turn 2 Rumble. Play Grist. Opponent does have the birds. And what do we want? Lumra, we're still pretty far from casting, but maybe that's kinda the end goal, since that'll give us the mana to cast our other expensive spells once we get a few lanes back. So next turn I can play Grist, potentially using the -2, sacking the spawn, although I probably want to keep this to make mana. Opponent with an heirloom. And a Wall of Blossoms. Can now play it alongside Wall of Omens in Brawl, so that's always fun. Alright, so I think I still go for Grist, although the problem now is our opponent can slam down Felothar, immediately attack with the wall, put Grist under pressure, so maybe should wait to deploy it to remove Felothar as opposed to just playing it now. Of course, the insect could just chump, so that's still fine. Yeah, I guess it is more mana efficient. Milled an analyst, so no insect. I guess they could have the mana to play Felothar and Heirloom to give Trample, although I believe this only applies to power 4 or greater. So despite Wall seemingly having 4 power, it still doesn't quite count. So they won't be able to give it Trample. So yeah, the visuals are a little confusing, because it looks like it has 4 power. It is going to deal 4 damage, but they can't use the Heirloom. So now we're going to want to remove Felothar. And the opponent comes to the realization here. Now they can still easily recast it for 6 mana. And I also need something I can sacrifice, which currently would be the spawn. But maybe Dredger's Insight can find something more useful. Alright, Virus Beetle, I don't mind sacrificing here. Make you discard. And then next turn with a land, we can potentially cast Lumra. Opponent's probably gonna just recast Felothar. Attack Grist. Grist dies. If they're only sending 1 creature at Grist, maybe it's worth saving. It's a close call. Because yeah, next turn I could just play 1 mana Grist, take out Felothar, and then our opponent's not doing much. That seems worth it. Because I'm not guaranteed to play Lumra yet. Alright, would have drawn the untapped land as it turns out. Can also activate Fountain Port to make a token, which I can then sacrifice. And then still play Grist. I guess I don't hate that sequencing. And then play my 1/2 Death Touch. So it's going to be 8 mana to redeploy. And we've got at least 4 lands in graveyard. And lots of creatures. Ooh, Bloodletter. So once they redeploy Felothar, we're taking a lot of damage. For now, I like Lumra. Can block the Bloodletter quite nicely. And then Hornet Queen gives us some pretty good blockers as well. Can maybe emerge the Mindbender. And then Shifting Woodlands can also maybe copy something in the graveyard. Like an Overlord, or maybe the Emerald Reidane. Opponent with a Sheltered by Ghosts, that was unexpected. Taking out Lumera. So I guess I have an incentive to take out the Bloodletter now with Grist. Or we can just play Hornet Queen. Persist also an option. So makes an insect for each artifact and or creature in my graveyard. Although I guess Persist doesn't get back legendaries, so would have to use the Woodland, which then doesn't trigger the ETB effect. Probably start by fetching. It would be a good opportunity for Distended Mindbender. I guess we can also transform Grist if I use Persists, which can then take out the Sheltered by Ghosts itself. So that also seems worthwhile. So then getting back the Overlords, which in turn gets back my Legend, seems fine. So we'll pay the green. And get this one back. And destroy artifact or enchantments. Alright, opponent's gonna protect their permanents, including the enchantments. Fair enough. Did get gifted a card at least. So that didn't quite work out, but we still have Hornet Queen to protect ourselves. I think that's better than any alternative here. I guess this also has Flying and Death Touch, but Hornet Queen seems safer. Make some more insects with Flying and Death Touch. Could emerge the Mindbender, although our opponent only has one card in hand, plus they also have Hexproof, I believe, so probably no points. And then Grist also tells us how many creatures we have in graveyard. So currently 10. Takenuma could also channel, but I don't think there's anything I particularly need to reanimate, so can maybe use the extra mana next turn. Okay, so they're still 2 mana away from redeploying Felothar. There are of course some other cards with a similar effect they could have. So then it's good to have all these blockers. And then the Infestation looks good, especially paired with the Reidane, making more insect tokens. And our opponent scoops it up. Alright, sweet. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Teferi, mono blue. Our hand is not going to be able to play Grist turn 2, unless I guess I sack something to Phyrexian Tower. Which could be worth it. Sure, I'll keep. So then I would rather sack the Pollinator and keep Moltender as something I can actually cast. Could also name Insect, since this is an insect when we're casting it. So we can make everything uncounterable. And a Gravedigger's Cage. Creature cards in graveyard and libraries can't enter. Alright, that's gonna shut down some of our reanimation effects, unless we want to use Boseiju. So, did pick up a Llanowar Elves, but I think I'm still in favor of playing Grist, since I cannot play the Elves and then make mana with the Pollinator because of Cavern naming Insect. So yeah, we'll just play Grist. I guess I can hit for 1 first. And And start milling, hope to mill an insect. We did not, but milled life to death, which would not have been particularly good with the Gravedigger's Cage in play. Not too easy for mono blue to interact with a resolved Planeswalker. Conundrum good against any fetch lands we might draw. Realm Walker to play insects off the top could be fun. Also have Masked Vandal, which can blow up any of their artifacts or enchantments, so we've got plays available. So this turn, I guess I can go Llanowar Elves plus Vandal, or Llanowar Elves plus Molt Tender. Grist can keep plussing. Mill the spider spawning, so then Gravedigger's Cage is probably what I want to remove here. So could do that now. Played Elves, so we can maybe get our doubling season down if our opponent taps out. Now it's just a matter of filling the graveyard to enable spider spawning and Grist's ultimate. Opponent plays the elite. Okay, so did not draw a land, but I could still try doubling season. They would need a very specific counterspell like Spell Pierce. So I'll go for it. Sack probably still an insect over the Vandal, since it blocks a bit better. And then if this resolves, I can plus make double the insects. I guess I could have a bounce spell into the Flood Maw, bouncing doubling season. At least we get double the fish tokens before that went away. Alright, pass it back. Can try again next turn. Although now they might have a counterspell. Now Conundrum also makes our Marsh Flats a little awkward. So it could just -2 Grist on the elite, sacking a fish. So we can start attacking. Opponent's gonna loot. And then Realm Walker is uncounterable at the moment. So that might be worth going for. Can also shuffle with the Marsh Flats if we don't like our top card. And name Insect. Land on top. I don't mind drawing. Although, probably gonna have to fetch in the opponent's turn if I want to get my land drop. So they can run out Teferi. If they make a blocker, we can -2 again, but they're gonna draw. So now I'm mostly worried about some sort of mass bounce spell. But we can resolve doubling season in the meantime. Get to Surveil. And Persist could be good, but we haven't milled any amazing creatures, so I'm gonna put that in the graveyard. And then Izoni on top. I could draw into it, or I could mill it with Molt Tender. I guess I'm fine drawing it. So now we have a land on top. Could mill it with Molt Tender. See what's next. Although I'm likely going for doubling season anyway. Finding an insect on top would be fun, and we did. So now the question is, do I cast the Explorer? It's still awkward with the Conundrum. So I think I would rather just resolve doubling season and then plus Grist with insect on top. And that's another insect. So I get to make 6 tokens, Grist on 9 loyalty, and finish off Teferi. Can send one at their face. Alright, so that worked out. Izoni also benefits from doubling season, and so does spider spawning. Opponent cantrips with Quicken. And scoops it up. Awesome. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Reidane. So mono white, luckily don't have any snow lanes. This hand is not great. Forever Young is a great card if we draw it late, so we can set up our Commander's +1 ability, but we're missing the self-mill effects. This one's a little bit better. Turn 1 Halfling sets up turn 2 Grist. Still have an answer to artifacts and enchantments. Opponent with an Arcane Signet into Lay Down Arms. Alright, so no turn 2 Grist after all. Molt Tender doesn't have anything in graveyard yet, so then I may as well commune and find... Those are some good hits. I guess the Overlord can get back something else from the graveyard later. So will our opponent play Reidane or the Protector Shield? I guess the shield could be quite good if we just make a bunch of insects, which then wouldn't deal any damage. Still down to play Grist and start filling the graveyard. And we milled an insect, another insect, and another insect. Wow. So we can already ultimate next turn if we'd like. And our opponent also requires us to pay 1 more mana, I believe. Soul Partition exiles Grist. May as well leave it there. So we can recast it for 5 and then not have to pay the commander tax in the future. Okay, so these 1/1 sadly don't deal any damage, unless we were to Masked Vandal exile the shields, which I could do. The shield only protects the opponents and their other permanents, but not the shield itself. Now with the city, we also have a nice mana boost. So we've got some options. Can just cast Overlord for 5 mana. Kinda like that idea. Alright, and our opponent's just gonna scoop it up here after we deployed 3/3 City. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Lurrus, so opponent's gonna be recycling things out of the graveyard. What do we think of our hand? It's maybe lacking a little bit of oomph, but once we get to 4 mana with Explorer, with all the self-mill we've done, we should be able to get ahead. And then Satyr Wayfinder should be able to find black mana. The Might exiling stuff also matters against Lurrus, so they can't recycle their artifact or enchantment. And now Mindspike can take one of our non-creature cards. Don't have a strong preference here. Takes a Commune, which digs a bit deeper. Okay. Found our black mana anyways. So we can go ahead and attack for 1. Mishra's Bauble's also an awesome combo with Lurrus, since they can just get it back for free to draw an extra card each turn. But Grist can hopefully take care of that. Found a land. Probably gonna wait on playing this, because it does cost 1 life. And Selfless Samurai can protect Lurrus. I'm sure they'll have a bunch of those effects. So that's problematic. Still down to play Grist. And then just plus this turn. Hope to mill more insects. Which we did. And no attacks. So next turn with the Explorer, we can also maybe shuffle our deck a bunch. Although I guess I don't have any fetch lands in circulation yet. So Lurrus into Bobble. Alright, so Gather the Pack looks for creatures, but Spell Mastery is enabled. Explorer wouldn't do much at the moment, unless we mill more lands with Grist. So this is a loop that I can't easily break. I pretty much need instant speed removal or a way to exile, which I don't have. So our opponent gets to keep Lurrus forever. I just need to try and overpower them. And what's the best way to do that? I guess we just gather the pack, see what else we find. Could also plus first. Milled Forever Young would have been a pretty interesting draw, since we can stack our library with a whole bunch of insects. Alright, milled Spider Spawning at least. So that gives us an alternate game plan. And then for now, probably go for Pollinator to develop our mana some more. Still only 3 creatures in graveyard, so that number needs to go up. So yeah, the opponent's deck is good at generating value and protecting their commander, but how do they plan on going over the top? Because they're not limited by their companion ability, they can play more expensive permanents as well. Opponent surveils. Sadly can't use the Might to snipe the Mishra's Bauble, since they would just sacrifice it in response. Alright, take my turn, draw land. Fetch land with the Explorer is also quite good. So, yeah, I guess we'll start by playing it. So we get to mill as much as possible. Don't have any fetch lands in the graveyard, so I would rather run out to Verdance. And get a swamp. So now we are starting to fill the graveyard quite nicely. So we can work our way up towards a spider spawning. I still think I want to name insect with a Bloodline Pretender, but I could also go for spider, I suppose. Let's go insect. Plus. Milled another land. Okay, so now our opponent's probably gonna remove the Explorer first chance they get. Otherwise we get to keep milling a bunch of cards each turn for free. So the -5 is 6 damage at the moment. I want to get that number up a little bit. Could also sack the peatlands with the Explorer. Ooh, Bojuka Bog, ouch. That was a pretty back-breaking play that I didn't expect. And now Planar Disruption my Grist as well to shut it down. That was an awful turn for us. I guess the Might can still remove the Disruption. But yeah, losing my spider spawning and my entire graveyard, including my fetch land, certainly hurt. So Haywire Might, Disruption, and then I guess we keep milling, see if we can hit some more lanes. Maybe starting with Insights. Otherwise I can sack the peatland and keep drawing. Can replay Fountain Port and then grab a Carrion Grub. That'll mill, maybe mill another land. Altanak. Play Carrion Grub, and then I can still maybe sack peatland and get it back. Alright, found another fetch land and a 3-tree city. That one's a little bit more exciting here. Name insect. So with the pollinator, I can still activate this. Tapping the insight, I guess. So I can play the analysts. And then may as well sacrifice it here. Or I can first use the Haywire Might on Disruption. Then maybe plus Grist. What's our creature count at? 6. Yeah, I'll just keep milling. Now they do have a flyer which can pressure my commander. Get all those lanes back, which will mill with the Explorer as well. And then hopefully we can set up a powerful ultimate. Okay, not a bad turn. Don't think the Pretender wants to attack just yet. So currently 12 creatures in graveyard. And Fountain Port for card advantage isn't bad either. Opponent's gonna finally deal with the Explorer. Exiling it right away. Fair enough. And they can do that every turn to take out my creatures one by one. And they're gonna replay it on the Pretender right away. And Deathrite's my draw, which we can use to exile instants and sorceries, but not enchantments. I've got a few redraws with my lanes. I can attack with the Carrion Grub, maybe force him to sacrifice something. Opponent blocks with Lurrus. Double blocks. So if they sack the Selfless Spirit, they can take out the Grub and gain 3. But then the Selfless Spirit isn't pressuring Grist anymore, at least. Alright, it's going to be a triple block. And they're just going to sack the Samurai instead, keep the Selfless Spirits, makes sense. So then they will lose the Warhounds. Okay, so right now I can deal 13. Let's see. Maybe start by making mana here. And draw with the peatland. And draw with Fountain Ports. Could also keep Fountain Port available to chump Lurrus and sacrifice so they don't gain life. Maybe that's better. And then for now just... yeah, what's the move? I guess I can take out Selfless Spirit with a -2. Sacking the Pretender so they can't exile it. Although then they don't have to pay 3 mana to exile first. Maybe I do just put the extra creature in graveyard here. Take out Selfless Spirits. So they're down to just Lurrus. Play Deathrites. And pass. So I'm still waiting for a powerful finisher. Because right now it's going to be tricky to get there with Grist's -5. But Deathrite can also work on their graveyard if they don't get rid of it first. Demolition Field is going to probably destroy my Fountain Port at some point. And they're going to go for it now. Alright, so we'll and draw a card. Just a Molt Tender. I'm hanging on to the fetch lands in case I find one of my landfall insects. So they need to get something back to protect Lurrus, probably. And they also need to deal with the Deathrite, which they're going to prioritize. Okay, so Lurrus is exposed, but of course they can also recast it for 5 mana, which is not too difficult. Or they could have a protection spell left, which is also not too unlikely. We are flooding a bit. I think I'm still gonna minus here, forced issue. Could maybe sack Wayfinder instead of an insect, but no, that works. So we can finally start attacking. And lures back to the command zone. They might have other ways to reanimate it. And I guess I'll keep land in hand now in case I have another discard spell they want to use. And Lurrus is back. Followed by maybe a Selfless Spirit. Yep. And a Bounty Agent can also blow up various legendary permanents. Not Planeswalkers, at least. Take my turn. Reanimate. Could be exciting. What do we have in the graveyard? Hornet Queen. Altanak, maybe not the best in the face of a cooped up. I guess we go for Overlord, which in turn gets back Hornet Queen, since mana is not a limiting factor. And then Grist probably keeps plussing. Can do that first in case we somehow mill something more exciting. Sure. Reanimate Overlord. And then Hornet Queen still looks like the best pick to me. The white, I guess, is also pretty large, but it's weaker in the face of spot removal. Cast Hornet Queen. Molt Tender can keep milling. Hope to find some more of our payoffs. So they're probably gonna cooped up exile the Overlord. Yeah, this combo is pretty annoying. Although it is 5 mana each turn, so it's not the cheapest to activate. So they've already used Lurrus' ability. So no getting back Selfless Spirits. Ooh, Nightmare. That can also recycle their stuff. Make sure to mill. Head Shredder could have been fun. And a Millipede is large, but doesn't have Trample, so opponent can pretty easily manage it. And Grist, I don't think is minusing, just want to work up towards a -5 if possible. So we can plus. Hope to hit some insects, just a Swarm Yard. Play Millipede. And then go to attackers. Send in at least 3 insects. Could also send in Hornet Queen, I guess. And if they want to trade for Selfless Spirit, that's fine. Keep 1 back to protect Grist at least. Maybe should have kept a second one back. Although they also need to deal with a Millipede. Yeah, opponent had all the answers this game. Bazooka Bog from my graveyard initially, otherwise spider spawning could have been lethal. Then the Demolition Field for Fountain Port, which could have drawn me an extra card each turn. But yeah, the game goes on. So they took the trade for Selfless Spirits, cooped up my Millipede. So can I keep Grist alive for 2 more turns and set up the ultimate? Hive can also exile stuff from my graveyard. Not sure if that's going to come up. So they can still use the Nightmare to get a creature back. Goes for the Samurai. I'll replay Nightmare. So they don't have much going on besides Lurrus' ability. So we'll mill with a Molt Tender. 31 cards remain. Realmwalker would have been a nice draw. Did I already use my Surveil land, or is it maybe worth fetching up if I have it left, just to improve my draw step slightly? I don't think I've seen it in the graveyard. So yeah, let's just Surveil here, since I need a good top deck. A Virus Beetle, not the best. Opponent can discard their land. Keeping it on top in my main phase could have helped me get more loyalty with Grist. How about a Doubling Season? That one's not bad. Will make it easier to ultimate my Planeswalker back to back. Okay, and then keep getting in with the flyers. Anyone else wanna get busy? Opponent can gain 3 potentially. I'll leave the rest back, I think. Okay, so next turn I can -5 Grist, which would be lethal. And if they remove Grist, I can just replay it from the command zone and then potentially have it enter with 6 loyalty to ultimate right away. So if they can't exile my graveyard, we might get there. Opponent's looking at Grist. Looking at their options. And our opponent concedes. Alright, sweet. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Tatyova, blue-green landfall. Our hand seems keepable. Turn 1 birds can set up Grist on turn 2. Got a few ways to fill the graveyard. And then hopefully we'll mill a couple insects with the +1 ability. Playing Urborg does also let the opponent preserve their fetch lanes without needing to sacrifice them right away. So I don't know if I want to play Urborg just yet. Can just get an Overgrown Tomb. Don't think my life total is going to be under too much pressure. Do we mill an insect? We do not. Got about a 1 in 4 chance. Turn 2 Caryatids, we cannot remove. Alright, so Grist is gonna plus again. Can maybe set up an insect with a Surveil. So then, yeah, I guess we can commune. And then Esper Origins, and then maybe plus Grist. And we get to pick the Overlord probably. Although the white of the Reliquary is also a good one. Can maybe play that now. And start sacking my insects to ramp. Because we do have an Izoni in hand. Which we wouldn't mind getting to. And then Grist can just plus. Did not mill an insect. But now the white can attack and then start sacking insects. Can technically already ultimate Grist, so just want to fill the graveyard as much as possible. And we've got some good self-mill engines in hand. Alright, Chromox, so they still have 3 mana available. Opponent pitching an extra turn card. for a Ristic Study now. Alright, that could be annoying. Persists, could get back the Overlord. So that's decent. Maybe I should just go for Town Greeter. Pay the one, hitting a land drop, and then I can still persist without paying the one afterwards. I guess I should decline now, and then, in case we don't find a land, I can still persist at least. Alright, found Phyrexian Tower. So that would have let me persist and pay the one, as it turns out. Now get back the Overlord. Can pay the one. That should grow the white some more. And get back a Lumera, which can in turn get back a bunch of lands. Okay, and then Grist wants to mill, since I don't think we have enough creatures for a lethal activation. Did not mill an insect, but I can attack. And then I guess I can do this at instant speed, so we'll just pass. So our opponent can play Tatyova, followed by a fetch land, draw some cards. But hopefully they can't do much else. So currently have 4 creatures in graveyard only. But that number could increase after attacking with Overlord. Can always sack an actual creature to the white as opposed to an insect token, so Town Greeter probably goes here. Talisman's fine. And a birds. So they can jump with the birds. Can get my Surveil land. If I haven't milled it yet. I guess there's also Shifting Woodlands. Which... is there anything worth copying in the graveyard? Not really. I guess Cavern Name Insects could be fine. If they had mana left, naming Elemental or Bear would also make sense. Alright, so step 1, I think, is gonna be to play Lumera. Can pay the 1 if I sack something to Phyrexian Tower as well. And then wait on the -5, since we might end up with enough creatures for that to be lethal. Izoni probably wants to wait. Yeah, that seems fine. Play Lumera. Pay the 1. And 3-3 city names insect. And now we get to Surveil. And then currently still have 7 creatures in graveyard, so I can attack. Get back Distended Mindbender, looks good. Could have also attacked first to maybe mill a few more lands with Overlord to get back with Lumera. So opponent's at 11, and we have 7 creatures in graveyard at the moment. Could add 1 more. So it's not quite a lethal -5, but still tempted to go for it here. Or we can just take out Tatyova, prevent him from going off next turn. That's also reasonable. And we're pretty far ahead on board. If they try and take out one of my creatures, I can maybe sack it to the white. And we've got some nice finishers in hand. Even if they play like an overloaded Cyclonic Rift to bounce my stuff, I built up my mana, so that shouldn't be a concern. Alright, and that'll do it. Awesome. So we get to see this black-green insect deck in action, and I'm very happy with where the deck ended up. It feels like we've got enough insects to really see those insect synergies shine, makes the deck feel thematically and mechanically more unique and different from other black and green decks, so that's always a nice bonus. But at the same time, there's still enough power here that the deck feels competitive enough to keep up in the pretty powerful Brawl queue nowadays, so I think we've hit kind of all the marks we needed to with this deck, and it's also nice that we don't need to dedicate a ton of removal in the main deck, as our commander takes care of that for us, so we can instead focus more on self-mill synergies and other graveyard interactions. So yeah, that's gonna do it for today's gameplay. I wanna thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.